Hey, Sean.
How's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good.
Good. So, have you gotten through any of this week's reading or assignments?
No, I haven't had a chance yet. My work is in the process of moving to a new shop, so I haven't had a whole lot of time.
Okay. Well, you got 4 days, 5 days, I guess. You did get the last week's assignments done, now I'm pretty sure, right?
What was that?
You got last week's assignments done?
Yeah.
Okay. Cody, Matthew, not connected yet. Jesse.
Is it pretty hard to get a job programming from home?
Good question. I think it might be difficult to get a and your first job as a programmer, just because you're untested. If you get some experience, you have a resume that shows that you've uh, done some programming of the type that a company is hiring for, then doing it remotely is pretty common nowadays.
All right.
Not, I mean, there in some cases it might be like remotely, meaning across the country, but a lot of companies still want their employees, like their programming team. If it's a organization that has, a number of programmers, then they would still want them to get together periodically in person. But with things like Zoom and Teams and stuff, that's becoming less of a requirement. So the biggest thing would be, having something on your resume that shows that you've done serious programming. Unlikely that someone's going to hire you to do programming without you being, there for them to make sure that you're coming along adequately, if you've never had a programming job before.
Makes sense. Yeah, I have a house in Minnesota, and then I live here half the year, so I'm trying to keep that because I'd rather stay in Arizona in the wintertime and then Minnesota in the summertime at the lake there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure.
Because I'm a disabled veteran, so I'm about 80% disabled, so I get about $13.50 a month. And what I'd like to do is just be able to kind of either be my own boss or like be a computer programmer, where it doesn't matter like where I am.
Right. Well, there's besides programming, there's some cybersecurity jobs that have a lot of remote workers, because as long as they can securely get into the network, like through a VPN, to do the monitoring and whatever it is their specific job is, then they can do a lot remotely. One of my instructors is actually, he's an adjunct instructor, but he does probably about 75% at least, maybe more of his work is from home, even, before COVID.
Oh, okay. Do you see that changing now that COVID hit too, as far as like the industry shifting a little more towards?
I think that you're going to see a lot more remote workers than there were before, because companies put a lot of money into the infrastructure to make that happen efficiently, and they can save a lot of money on facilities and not have as many computers up and running in the office, so their facilities costs can go down. They can even, maybe have room for 10, but actually have 20 employees, that kind of thing, or more than that even. So I think you'll see that. Yeah, I think COVID has made, companies see that that's a viable way of operating. Other companies will say, we hated it and we want everybody in the office. So I think it'll depend on the company and how well it worked out for them. All right.
Another thing I'm just thinking about doing is just maybe just doing my own IT business, just doing like computer repair for people and remote logging in if I need to
Right.
Different clients. And
yeah, that's definitely a possibility. Even with the programming, if you start small like that, doing little jobs for small businesses, I did some of that, even though I did program as my primary job for a while. I also just did little programming for small businesses, and that helped build up my resume for programming if I ever wanted to, get back into that as a full-time thing. So, finding small businesses, if you get a good programming skill, and then find some businesses that need it, things like databases and basically VB script or Visual Basic are pretty, for small businesses, those are in fairly big demand, because a lot of small businesses need to be able to, let's say, manipulate their data or view their data in a way that they can't normally, and they need somebody to write some programs to be able to do that for them. Even becoming expert in Excel macros, which is essentially, another form of programming, because it uses VBA, Visual Basic for Applications. That's a pretty good skill to have if you're going to be an entrepreneur for small businesses.
I'll have to look into that then.
Yeah. And then, of course, you're learning Python, and you can do a lot with Python too, even for small businesses. I find lots of little things to do with Python, just to help me out with little things. So I'm sure that if you get good enough at it, you can find a way to make some money off of it.
I have another question for you. How well does the security program at Yavapai connect to like Embry-Riddle's program? Is it pretty?
We are in touch with them quite a bit. We are working towards the same national certification as a program that they have, except theirs is a 4-year version and ours will be a 2-year. So they just got their certification last year, but they've been running their program for about 4 years now, 4 or 5 years. So it's going to take us another year or so, or another couple of years to get that certification. But in the meantime, they've told us that they'll take our students, our graduates of our cybersecurity program. We just don't have any formal agreement yet until we get that national certification. So,
all right, because that was my plan, is to transfer over there in the fall.
Yeah, when you're ready to do that, there's a person I can put you in touch with that's in the head of the program that I know, and we've had some long conversations. So I would expect that he should, accept you. Perhaps I'm not 100% sure it would be right in as a junior if you get the associate's degree here, but it's probably a good chance that that would be the case, or
Well, that
maybe
would be good.
just a few more credits. Okay, looks like we've got all we're going to get. So I'll go ahead and get started for the night. Share my screen. Okay. So week 3, we're looking at the end of module 2, the last 2 parts of module 2. In addition, I wanted you to go over some stuff that this curriculum doesn't have until module 5, which was restricted and you weren't allowed to access until I figured out how to push it up into the basics class, essentially. So Python Essentials Part 1 Basics. So if I sent an announcement about that, but just review for anyone that didn't see that. I essentially dragged module 5 up into the basics part. It used to be down here in part 2, intermediate, and you couldn't access it. So I found how I could drag it up here into the first part. So you should be able to access that now. I'm not expecting you to go through all of module 5, obviously, just very targeted to those specific sections that I mentioned. And that's because all of these functions and methods, and a method is just a different way to call a function. All these functions and methods have to do with strings, and string manipulation is a important part, I think, of programming. You do it quite a bit. So I didn't really want to wait until module 5 for you to start looking at that, since some of the extra assignments that I'm going to have you do will involve string manipulation. So once you get through 2.6, the actual test for this module, the quiz and the module 2 test, is only based on 2 through 2.6. So you can take that first if you want, but then I do want you to go and read about these string manipulation methods and functions, so that you can use them in some of the upcoming assignments. Okay, any questions about this week's assignments? Have you doing a few labs? The 2.5 one is pretty quick and easy. 2.6 labs. Ignore anything that's got the unpublished circle. It means that I haven't decided whether I'm going to use it, and I'm not going to use it for this week. So there's quite a few assignments. I wanted you to do a class poll so I get an idea of how people feel about the pace of the course. And I want you to get that done before the end of the week, if at all possible. Because if I get enough people saying that it's too fast, then I might adjust things a little bit in upcoming weeks. If everyone is okay with the pace or think it's too slow, then I'll either keep it as is or even speed it up a little bit if necessary. So I want you to do that so I get an idea about that. There's a couple other questions in there as well. And then the lab assignments, that again, they are taken, the lab assignments are taken from the curriculum, but I add a little twist to it. So see what you can do with those. This one here that's for extra credit, where it uses only 2 inputs, that's extra credit because I don't think you'll be able to do that unless you study some of these up here. It's going to depend on at least one of these methods for you to be able to do this extra credit version, where you only get 2 inputs from the user instead of a whole series of inputs. And the last thing I wanted to show you here, okay, well, you got to do the quiz as usual, and then we're at the end of the module 2. So I want you to do that module 2 test. And again, the Z-fill method, it is not strangely in the curriculum at all. So you just have to look it up. Just Google it. Go to one of the many websites that have Python information, documentation, tutorials, and so forth. I'll actually send out an announcement with a couple of my favorite Python websites for learning Python. The last thing I wanted to show you under the assignments is this threaded assignment. So usually I start these up in the first week or so, but with being remote, I just felt like I needed to slow down a little bit and push these off till a little bit later. So I just want to show you this threaded assignment and what it's expecting. And why it's called threaded is that it means that there's going to be additional assignments that build on this one or that are related to this assignment. So the goal here is we're going to start off with a pretty simple program that builds on itself, and eventually towards the end you're going to be sending a packet to a port and an IP address, and the IP address will be the address of a server that's expecting the packet, and in that packet will be your name, and maybe we'll do some other stuff as well if that goes well for everybody. So to start off with, you're just doing the basics where you're creating some variables and assigning a variable to your name, a string that's your name. You're assigning a variable port to a integer value that doesn't matter what it is at this point. Like it says, we'll get more specific a little bit later, but it can be any integer from 1024 to 65535. And then a final string that looks like an IP address. That, it'll just be a string with an IP address inside. So again, doesn't matter what that address is right now, just any old IP address that's valid. And then print the variables out in this format. So your output should look like this, with the variables that are in italics be printed out as their values. All right, and then save the program as a PY file. So you would probably want to do this in Fawny or some other idle development environment, or anything else that you want to do. But when you save it, you save it as with the PY extension. All right, the assignment won't take it unless it's got a PY extension, which means it's a Python file. Okay, and then you'll see in the next week that there's a threaded assignment 2, I think 2 and 3. So, like I said, it'll build on that basic program from here on out. All right, any questions about all that? No questions? Okay. All right.
When is that happening again?
Pardon me?
When is that due again? When are we doing that again?
All of these are due February 7th, which is this Sunday.
Thank you.
Sunday at midnight. Okay, class poll is available until the 14th, but I think I made it, but I would like you to take it as soon as possible. And as I'm going, by the way, feel free, there's not a lot of, back and forth. So feel free to shout out if you have a question or need me to repeat something or whatever, or clarify something. All right. Okay, I'm going to start off with a review of the stuff that you covered earlier in 2.4. And again, this is one where I just want you to shout out the answer. It doesn't matter who, just as long as I hear something from somebody. So this is that, end of each section summary. And I asked in the last meeting that, you do these to make sure that you have a good understanding of that section. So if I were to run this code up here in exercise 1, what is it going to print?
3.
Right. So you assign 2 to var, you assign 3 to var. Well, this second assignment basically just wipes out the first assignment and essentially it recreates the variable named var. And then it prints var, the contents of var, which is of course 3. What about exercise 2? Which of those variable names are not legal in Python?
101 m space 101 and lowercase delete.
Right. So 101 is not legal because you can't start a variable name with a number. You can have numbers in it, but it can't be the first character of the variable name. And of course, that's all numbers, so that's doubly bad. And then that one is because it's got a space, can't have a space. And DEL is because why? Why is that not a valid Python variable?
Isn't that a command?
It's a keyword, yes. It's used in like lists and things to delete items and delete variables and things like that. Okay, what about exercise 3? What's the output of
2.
this?
2.
Okay, so since we've got quotes around this, that means that
Wouldn't it just put them together?
strings. And when you can use the plus operator in between strings, it doesn't add them as in math. It just puts the strings side by side to make one bigger, a single bigger string. So all this is going to be is 1, 1. If the quotes weren't here, then they would be numeric values, not strings, and it would be, of course, 2. But with the strings around them, it just puts the 2 strings together, the 1 and the 1. It's not 11, it's just a string with the numerals 1 and 1 in it.
Yeah, it makes sense. I missed the double quotes and the single quotes.
Right. So the output of the last one there, A division equals 2 times B. So that's the same as saying, that's the shortcut version of saying A equals A divided by 2 times B. At least I think that's what it is. I don't like to use the shortcut operators with a equation on the right side. I don't even really like to use it much with division. I only like to use it really with addition. But so I think this is going to be the same as A equals A divided by 2 times B. So that'd be 6 divided by 3, which should give you 2 times B, which should be 6. Is that going to be right? Anyone know? It's either 6 or 1. It's 1. Okay, so it's actually A equals A divided by 2 times b. So the 2 times b occurs first. So a divided by, a equals a divided by 2 times b, which is 2 times 3 is 6. So 6 divided by 6 is what it ends up to be. A equals 6 divided by 6. So the reason I said 6 at first is because I was assuming that they would do the multiplication first, or I mean that they would do the division, the a divided by 2 times b, but they essentially did it as though they did the multiplication first. Okay, again, that's why I don't like to use the shortcut version when there's a more than one operand on the other side of the equal sign, because it makes it more confusing than clearing it up. The time when I like to use shortcut is really only one case, and that is something like that. Okay, that's going to be a equals a plus 1. That's just a shortcut for saying a equals a plus 1. Okay, so a is going to be 2 in this case. That doesn't mean you can't use it if you like it in other places, but as we just saw there, it gets confusing when you've got a more information on the right-hand side of the equal sign. Okay, so the next section is about comments, and comments, there's not much to say about them. That's why it's a real short section. In Python, anywhere there's a pound sign, pound is not, has only one meaning in Python, and that is anything after this pound sign on this line is not to be executed. It's only a comment created by the programmer. It has no function in the program whatsoever. And it can be an entire line, or it can be at the end of a statement. And so in this statement here, C equals blah, 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 that is the only code that gets executed, and everything from the pound sign on is just to look at. All right. And that's about all there is about comments. I did mention the other day, last week, that there is another form of comment called a multi-line comment that has kind of dual functions. It also is a multi-line string. But if you use triple quotes, and if you notice in Thorny, it turned the entire screen green, which basically says until I close those quotes, everything is considered a comment now. So I can make a multi-line quote and say, this is my program, it does such and such. Okay, and then I would close that comment by ending with triple quotes. So that is another form of comments. These are also can be used as help messages in a program. We're not going to get into that, but in any case, it is a way to make a multi-line quote, a multi-line comment without having to put a pound sign at the beginning of every line. You can, and like I said, you can also make it a multi-line variable. You can assign a variable to the string with 3 quotes. Okay, so, you know, I don't even know if I assigned this lab. It's pretty simple. It's basically just telling you, you know, where should you remove comments and where should you maybe add comments, which comments are superfluous, meaning they're not necessary. You can get too crazy. You know, most people don't use comments enough in their program. Some people use them excessively, like this. okay, this is a useless comment because anyone reading the code, at least presumably they understand a little bit about programming and probably the Python language. And so they know that that's printing, okay, the hours. So a comment like that, in my opinion, is just muddies, it junks up the program. And you shouldn't use comments that really don't add anything to understanding what the program does. Same thing with this one here. Obviously, if you want this print statement to do something, you would have to delete this comment because the entire print statement is commented out. So yeah, you know, I'm not sure. I can't remember. Maybe I did assign that lab, but in any case, it's pretty basic. Okay, so here's the key. So like I said, very short section. It was only a couple of pages about comments. All right, anything before I go on to the next section, 2.6, which is all about that input statement that I had you look up to do that 2.4110 or whatever assignment. Yeah, 24110. So I think you might have the basics of input already, but I'm going to go through this, you know, maybe reasonably quickly to see if there's any thing I can add to it and if there's any questions. So if you look at the bottom here, it's using a print statement for a prompt. And then it's saying a variable equals input. Okay, two things about the input statement. By default, well, I mean, it always, I shouldn't say just by default, but the input statement always returns a string. Does not return an integer. Like if you type a number 1115 or something at an input statement, here I'll just do the, I'll do a little quick. Whatever, I just typed in a number. All right, so A has that number. Now, when
We're not
oh,
seeing
I'm
that.
sorry, sorry, I just typed in this stuff down here, okay? So A, after I typed in 1114 for the input statement, has the value 1114 in it. And you can see it's got quotes around it. But to further understand that A is a string, you can use the type function at the Python console, and it'll tell you that A is of class str, which means string. Okay, so doesn't matter if you enter a numeric value, it's still going to be taken in as a string. The only way to change that A from a string to a numeric value is how? Because I know some of you did it, or most of you did it in your program. So what would I do if I wanted to make A an integer, for example?
When you put int, like int before the a, so you just do int and then
I would say A equals int A. Okay, so in other languages like C, that's called casting. So I'm casting, converting essentially A from whatever type of value it is now to be turning it into an integer. So by doing this statement here, A equals int A, I'm taking the string A, I'm turning it, converting it into an integer A and stuffing it into a new variable A. So the old variable A that was a string is gone. There's a new variable A created that now holds an integer. And to prove it, you say dir A, and whoops, not dir, type, sorry, type A, and it says class integer. And of course, for the program that you did, you wanted to say, you know, after, you know, you said input, and some of you did this, which is great. A lot of you didn't, but really you want to prompt the user what you're looking for them to input, okay? Some of you did it with a print statement first, and that's fine, but you can also put the prompt inside the input statement. Just put a string in there in the input statement, and it will prompt the user, okay? And it stays on the same line as well, which is sometimes nice. So input a number, input 12, and then you guys, in that program that you had to do, you had to cast x to a float. X equals float x. So a floating point number. And it's got the .0 after it. Okay, so those are the two really additions that you had to do to this program. Well, really just the input statement. And then you had to you had to the input statement, then you had to cast it to a float instead of just having a static value in the program assigned to X. Now, there is one other thing you can do. I don't like it, and the reasons we'll see later, but the curriculum does show you about doing it this way. And that is saving a statement. You can put float around the input statement. You just use the keyword float and then left parenthesis, your input statement, right parentheses. What that does is it immediately takes the output of the string output of the input statement and immediately casts it to a floating point number and then assigns it to X as a floating point. Okay, so, and I'll give you an example of why I don't like to do this, but first I'm going to make it work. So I entered a number, and if I show you what X is, it's a floating point already. It says 45.0. And just to verify again, use the type function, and it says it's a float. Now I'm going to run the same thing, and I'm going to do this. And I get an error. Okay, so the reason I don't like to convert the number that's input immediately, and why I prefer to make it a separate operation, is because there's no way to validate the input, and someone doesn't, if they don't type a numeric value at the input statement, they're going to get an error. Okay, so because when float operates on what's entered at that input statement, float is expecting a numeric value to turn into a floating point number. And I entered just some letters, and float crashed. Basically the program crashed on me. So if this was in an actual program that users were using, and they accidentally typoed and entered a letter or any character that's not a number, they would get this error and your program would blow up, and they'd be calling you and saying, why is your program blowing up on me? So instead, and we'll be looking at this more later on, quite a bit later on. And this also pertains to cybersecurity as well. One of the big rules in cybersecurity as far as programming goes is you always have to validate your input. So whenever you're getting input from a user, from a file, from anything, you have to make sure that it is of a type of input that your program is expecting. And there's ways to do that, as I said, in Python, that we'll go into quite a bit later. But if you don't do that, then you're going to, first off, maybe blow up your program. In worst case, you'll get, your program will be subject to things like SQL injection attacks, where somebody can enter an SQL statement at an input line where they're supposed to enter, maybe something that they're supposed to search for. They can enter a SQL statement and get the entire contents of a database or something like that. In my penetration testing course that I'm running right now, my students will actually do an exercise like that where they are at a web form and they try to figure out how to essentially dump the contents of the entire database by using an SQL injection. And the way that you stop attacks like SQL injection, but all other types like buffer overflows and so forth that are common in poorly written programs, is to validate your input. Make sure your input is something your program expects, can handle, and is not dangerous in some way. Okay, so there really isn't a lot more to the input statement than what I just showed you. It always returns a string, and if you want it to do anything besides that, you have to cast it to, or convert it to another type of variable. Let's see what else they talk about here. This section does talk about some additional things. Here's where it talks about the string and the float conversions. And I've already mentioned it, but this section talks a little bit. Yeah, typecasting is what I was mentioning. It was just called casting in C and some other languages. So again, they, in their own examples, are typecasting directly from the input statement. You can do it. The language allows it. If you want to be a good professional programmer rather than just whipping something together real quick, you would never want to do that. You always want to validate the input before doing an operation on it that would cause an error of some sort. And unfortunately, you'll find that validating data, validating user input or input from files or whatever, is probably about 75% of the size of any program. When I write I've got a program, I might have mentioned it to you, that takes a text file and basically turns it into an XML file for use in importing into a test bank. But the format of that file is very rigid, and if there's information in the file that's incorrect, then it'll either blow up the program or it'll produce incorrect results in the test bank. So pretty much every line of input that my program reads from the file, it's got to verify that it is of the correct format. And that's about maybe more than 75% of the code is validating the data. It's not the funnest part of programming, but it's necessary, unfortunately. Okay, so here it is talking about concatenation. So remember when we first were talking about operators, we were talking about operators as they mostly apply to numeric values, but this section is talking about the fact that the plus and the asterisk or multiplication operator can be used with strings. So I can say this isn't the console. Okay, and so I used a multiplication operator on a string, And as you see, all it did was take my string and duplicated it. In this case, just twice. If I do it, change that 2 to a 4, now it's going to print, this is a string 4 times. Not so useful with actual like sentences, but useful for duplicating single characters multiple times in certain instances. You can also, of course, concatenate using the plus. The plus operator needs to be, on both sides of the plus operator, it needs to be a string value. So it can't be, it can't be a numeric value. You can't mix strings and numerics with the plus operator. All right, so it just printed a single string. And you can also use it with variables. All right, so that's going to print what the contents of A and the contents of B are being put into the A variable. So the A variable will now contain both of those strings, and it's going to just print it out. All right. So that's the main takeaway with
Is line 3, I can't see that very well. Is that A equals A plus B? Oh, okay, thanks.
is that good?
Yeah, it almost looked like a minus.
Yeah, I can't see what you guys see in terms of the screen quality, but is this better when it's made bigger like this?
It is for me, thank you.
Okay. Okay, and so this is the example of using the multiplication to replicate a string some number of times. All right, this is using the plus sign to concatenate is fairly common in a lot of languages. Using the multiplication operator to duplicate a string, not as common. Usually languages will have some function to do that you have to call as opposed to the multiplication operator. But it's one of those kind of quick and easy things to do that Python is pretty well known for. It's pretty well known for being able to do quite a bit of stuff with comparatively few statements, because the language itself just has a lot of functionality built into all of the statements that are part of the language. Okay, I'm not going to do all of these, but we talked about type conversion. Just put you can also use the str operator to convert a integer value to a string. So A is well, I'm going to do this in the Fawney console. By the way, clearing your shell, just Control L. I think I mentioned that in another meeting, but I don't think everybody was here. Or you can do edit and clear shell. Okay, so we see A is a integer, and now we can just say a string A. Now it's a string. So now, if I needed to, I could use A in string operations. For example, if when A is a integer, I can't use it with the concatenation operator. All right, so you might want to print using this method, but that's going to give you an error. So to fix that, you just cast A. You don't have to do it before the operation, the print statement. You can do it right inside the print statement if you want. The only reason you would do it before, like you'd say A equals string A before the print statement, is if you know you were going to use A over and over again as a string. But if you're only going to use it once, then it makes sense to put it right there in the print statement. And now that works. Now, of course, with Python, you don't really need to do this because you can just do this and separate the string from the A, the numeric A. It doesn't matter what type of value it is now. With a comma, I'll just do that again to prove it. So now A is an integer, and so it works just fine if you don't use the concatenation operator. If you need just to print it out, you can use the comma in the print and separate the string value from the numeric value, and print knows what you mean. But there are instances where where you have a more complex thing to print, or you need to put A into another variable before it's used, and you need to put it in that variable as a string. So that might be another reason to cast it from an integer to a string. And of course, you can cast floating points to strings as well.
Can you go back to your Thani terminal real quick?
Yeah.
You received an error. Why did that error out?
This here?
Yeah.
Okay. So in this case, let me clear this screen. In that example, I said A equals 10. Oops. And let me see if I can increase the font. There we go.
10 is a 1979 movie directed by Blake Edwards, starring...
Shut up, Google. Is that better? Can you see it better? Whoever was
Yes.
Josh. Okay. So I said A equals 10, and then I did a print. And I tried to use the string concatenation operator with A. All right. And since A is an integer, you can't concatenate an integer to a string. And that's what this is trying to do. I'm trying to print this string plus A as a string, but A isn't a string. A is a integer, and the concatenation operator won't work between a string and an integer. So in that case, I have to cast A to be a string, and then it works. And this error even tells you type error can only concatenate string, not int to string. Okay, so the error messages error messages aren't always, super intuitive, but sometimes they give you enough information as to what you did wrong. If you remember,
Okay. I thought you had already turned it into a string.
No, not in that case.
I see. Okay. Sorry.
That's all right. All right. Yeah. So this is pretty much what you, very similar to what you did in 24110 in that assignment I gave you, except it's a different equation. But you're getting the x value as a floating point. Okay, and then this is the program, the lab assignment that you need to turn in, but with the little twist of, where is it? Two, 6, 111 with seconds. Okay, so if you look, it says, oh, that's the extra credit version, sorry. So I want you to do 26111. I would try to do 26111 as it is first to make sure that you can do it, you know, in the somewhat simpler version, and then add this stuff to turn in as for the assignment. And you'll turn the assignment in, make sure you save it as that with the Pi extension. Okay, and then if you, you know, what would be ideal is if you go and look at some of those string methods, and particularly the Z-fill method I told you you have to look up. You can make the output look like this. So 1 o'clock would look like 0100 instead of just 10, which doesn't really look like a time. If you can't get this part, not a big deal, but it'd be ideal if you could, if you can figure out how to use the Z-fill method to get this done. So let me go back to that assignment, the original assignment. So basically what you need to do is you are getting as input the starting time of an event in hours, and minutes. And then you're asking for the user to input the duration of the event. So if the person enters 12 for the hour and 17 for the minute, and they enter 59 for the duration, that means you've got to figure out how it ends up as 1316. And in the 24-hour time format is fine for this if you you know, figure out, because they're even saying 0 to 23. So you don't have to convert that to 1:16 p.m. Although if you do, that would be, you know, that would be impressive. You will be using the modulo operator. You'll also be using the integer division operator. And then, you know, they give you some sample input. So you can compare your, you know, you can use this sample input for your program to make sure that you're getting the required output. And then once you get this part working, then add, it's basically just one more layer, adding seconds, where you ask for the seconds and you ask for the duration in minutes and seconds. So you're going to get the start time in hours, minutes, and seconds, and the duration in minutes and seconds. And then you've got to convert that to the appropriate end time in hours, minutes, and seconds. So this one's a little bit harder than the last one I think that you did, but you know, work on it, and you know, I think you can probably get some help from the dashboard to help you with the, where did that go? You can get help from the dashboard to kind of get you started with it. But adding the additional part, you know, is kind of on your own. All right. Let me see what else we Now let's look at the quick takeaways for this section. See if there's anything that, yeah, there was no real, you know, little checks, check your, check the results one. So, oh yeah, there is. Okay. So what's the output of the following snippet? So x equals int input, enter a number, and then print x times 5.
Would it give an error?
If the user enters 2 at the input statement, what is the output going to be? No, let's just do it. I'm going to bring Fawny down here.
Wouldn't it just be 2 of 5 2 times?
It'd be the string 5 2 times. Yes.
Yep.
Oh, so it works in inverse as well. Okay.
Because yeah,
It doesn't matter which side of the operator things are on. So 2 was what the input was, and then the next statement was print x times 5. So it's basically saying, normally you wouldn't do this. You would do print string times, because that makes more logical sense to someone reading your code, but it does work either direction. Okay, so you don't have to put the string in front of the multiply sign. Although you probably would in, you know, in real life. This was just to confuse you, to be honest. But that's, you know, part of it is if you understand that x times string 5 is the same as string 5 times x, then, you know, that's good. That, you know, that is important to understand. Okay, what about the expected output of this one? And user enters 2. Okay, and so this is that type is the that function I showed you. It also works within a program, so you can use the type function in your program to see the type of a number. So what's that going to print?
Would it be string? Because it takes a string.
Correct, because input always produces a string unless you typecast it, you know, within the around the input statement. So yeah, that'll do class string. Good. All right, and that's it for module 2. Then you'll have the quiz, and then you'll want to take the module 2 exam. I'm gonna, what time is it? So we've only been here for an hour. I'm going to look at, I've got a little presentation on the split join and Z fill and replace. It's a little bit different order than what is in your in the week 3 module, but it really doesn't matter. Well, let me just do it as a PowerPoint. Okay, so first, you know, real quick, we'll cover the console functions, which I think I've already shown you those enough times to for you to understand what they do. The type function, you just put either a literal value or a variable inside the quote, inside the parentheses, and it will tell you what type of value that is: integer, string, float, list, dictionary, and there's others, many others. But those are the most of the variable types that we're going to learn anyway. All right, so this is talking about lists, which is, I believe, the next module 3, yeah. Module 3 is going to cover lists, so that's good. They're really fun to work with. All right, so the type function and then the dir function is something to help you find out what type of attributes, but mostly not attributes, mostly what type of methods are available for a particular variable type or data type. So what I mean by that is if I say dir and then put a string inside there, that's basically asking Python to tell me what are the attributes available and the methods available for a string value. And gives you a lot of stuff, all right? But we mostly care about only the ones after the ones that start with a double underscore. We don't need to deal with the mostly the things with double underscores and in the beginning and the end. Those are mostly attributes. Some of them are methods, but they're not something that you typically want to use very often. All of these, starting with capital I's, are methods for a string. And I'm going to give you an example and say, okay, and you can do this with a variable and you can do it with a literal, a string literal. So I'm going to say the string literal is numeric. This is how you call a method. You say variable name, or in this case, literal, a dot, and then the name of the method, which is like a function call. So, and then you got to put the left and right parentheses after it. So what this is going to do, what do you think this is going to do? Any guesses as to when I hit enter, what is Python going to return here?
True.
It's going to return true. Now,
False.
okay. So remember when I was telling you before about the input function that you shouldn't cast it immediately. You should, validate your input. Well, some of these methods here are ways that you can validate your input, like checking to see if it's numeric. So you, again, instead of using a literal, I'll use a variable. And again, is numeric. All of these are string methods. They won't work on integers or floats or whatever. So I've got to assign a integer to my string a string to my variable a, and then I can say a dot is numeric. So you can use that in like if statements. If a dot is and since it did, it printed it's a number. Now if I say and then whoops. See, it didn't print anything that time. Make sure of it. Okay, because A is not numeric now, because it contains ASDEF in it. So the statement A is numeric resulted in false. So basically, if false, it won't do what's under the if statement if the results of the if statement are false. It'll only do what's under the if statement if the results are true. So another example of using, and this will be a big hint for, this might be coming in a little bit early because lists were done a little bit earlier before in the curriculum, but I'll put it out there and see if anyone can take what I do here and do one of those extra credits, or particularly the extra credit that had to do with just using 2 input statements for that lab. So if I have a variable so so that's a time, 12:03 and 11 seconds. Now, in order for me to do any type of arithmetic operation on the hours and the minutes and the seconds, which is what I need to do for that program, I need to get them individually broken apart. I need to get the 12 isolated from the 03, isolated from the 11. And the way that you do that is with the split function, or the split method. And you bet what this basically is telling Python to do is split the string A up into its constituent parts separated by a colon. So it's basically going to create 3 items. Wherever there's a colon found in the string A, it's going to take the item to the left of that colon and make it one element of a list. It's going to take the element to the right of that colon and make it an element of the list. And then since there's another colon, it'll take that final 11 and make it an element of the list. And it'll take all those elements and put them into B. And again, we haven't talked about lists, so if this is, if you're not following too well, you will eventually. So now, once I've done that, let me clear my screen again. When I show you what's inside B is 3 separate strings, a list of strings. Okay, so let me just do that again. So I assigned A to a string at times, which is what somebody would enter in that lab if you were only doing it with 2 inputs. They would enter it like that. And then I'm using the split method, which is one of the ones I had to look up, and with a colon as the separator, and that split method will take every item that is in that string, each individual item separated by colons, and turn them into individual strings in a list. And that's what B now is. So now I can say hours equal string, int B, and now here's where I have to tell what part of B do I want. I want the first element of B to be the hours. And I want to cast that 12 string to be an integer. So with a list, you give it the variable name, the brackets, and then you tell it which element you want. Python starts its element numbering with index 0. So this is basically saying, that right there is saying, give me the 0th element of the B list. And 12 is the 0th element. 03 is the first element, or the 1 element, index 1. And 11 is index 2. So doing that, it assigns hours now equals 12. And you can see that hours is now an integer. All right, and so to continue, I would say minutes equal int b. I want the second element, or really the first index value of b to be my minutes, and then seconds. So now I've got hours, minutes, and seconds as integer values that I can now do the math required to add the duration stuff to end up with the ending time of the result. All right, so that's a quick, you don't need this you don't need to use the split method and all that with the main assignment, but the extra credit part of the assignment, you'll absolutely need something just like what's on the screen here. All right, so that's why I wanted you to look up those. Now, the other method that I wanted you to look up specifically to help out with the way that stuff looks is the Z-fill method. Okay, and what the Z-fill method does is it helps you with formatting of stuff when you want the formatting to be not just a single digit, but you want it to be zero filled, and that's what the Z means, zero fill. Okay, so let me just give you an example. B has the string, well, do A first. A has the string 2 in it. And if I say a.zfill, two. Okay, so basically what this is saying is return a new string that is A, but there are leading zeros in front of whatever is in A. And the 2 says, I want the total length of the string to be two characters long. All right, so it took that 2 and zero filled to the left with, in this case, just 1 0, because I told it to just, I want the total length of the string to be 2. If I wanted it to be 3 digits long, then I would have 0 0 2 with the Z-fill method. All right, so you can print that. You can, of course, print, so I can say print a dot Z-fill. Oh, by the way, doing that Z-fill does not change how A looks. A is still just 2. It just returns, the method returns a string, a new string with leading zeros. If I wanted to change the contents of A, I'd have to say A equals A dot Z-fill 2. Now A's been changed to be 0 2. I'm going to change it back, and I'm going to show you that you can just put the Z-fill in a print statement. Okay, so what's that going to print?
O2:01.
So 2:01, exactly. So in the assignment, I say try to get your output to look like that instead of having numbers like, like 2:10 or 5 minutes after 2 would normally be expressed either as this or really more commonly is that 2:05. Okay, but you wouldn't typically see that as a time. You wouldn't recognize that as a time, 2:5. So you would want that zero fill in the output of your time. And just always use 2 because you'll never have a time that has more than 2 digits. And if your number is already 2 digits, like 12, A dot Z fill, okay, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't change it because I'm telling Z fill I only want the length of the string to be 2 digits. And if it's already 2 digits, then Z fill basically does nothing. Okay, so you don't have to go and check to see if the length is already 2. You just use the Z fill with the 2 value and it'll print appropriately. It'll either zero fill or it won't. All right. Here's another one. All right, so I just showed you Z fill. And I showed you a little bit about split. I'm not going to go over join, and at this point, it's something that is a nice method that we'll use eventually when we write something that's very close to a subnet calculator, or at least the startings of a subnet calculator. But as of right now, read about it, but you're probably not going to need it. Well, you might. There might be a program down the road that where it could come in handy. So read about it and kind of tuck it away for when you. Yeah, actually, yeah, subnet calculator. We'll be doing that toward a little bit later. The replace is one that's really nice. So the replace method does just what it sounds like. Let me bring up Fawny. So so I want to replace the HEs in hello there with she, and produces that. Not in this case, maybe not very useful, but if you do any kind of programming that requires string manipulation, you'll use the replace method quite a bit. So the replace method is just the string that you want to replace with the string that it should be replaced with. And again, it doesn't change A. A is still hello there. It just returns the new string. If you wanted to replace A, you would say A. Now A contains the altered results. Okay, and then almost last, if not last, is the len. Now len is not a method. It is a function. So you don't say a.len, although I sometimes try to because I forget and think that it is a function, but it's not. It is I think it's a method, but it's actually a function. So the way that you use len is you use the function, you type out the function name, left parenthesis, and then what you want to know the length of. So in this case, I want to know the length of A, and it tells me it's 13. That means that there's 13 characters between those quotations. Okay. So you can also use len lists. So it says there's 7 elements in this list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so len is helpful in finding out the length of what's called a variable that can be enumerated. In other words, that's got multiple elements as part of it. So a string has multiple elements. I can actually access just the first character of A by saying A sub 0. It just gives me the S. So any variable type that has that can contain multiple elements can be used with the len function. All right, that's all I had for covering this week. Any questions?
Do you actually reference a lot of material or stuff online when you're programming?
All the time. I don't remember. I remember C, the C language, better than I know the Python language. Although I've been doing Python just about long enough that the only times where I have to look up the language is when I'm trying to use functions that I think must be out there, that are might be part of the Python language, but I've never used them, or I forget how to use them. Like I forget the, what parameters to put in the function or the method call. So I use a number of websites. I usually just Google it, but most of the time when I Google something for the Python language, I end up getting one of some number of websites that are either the Python official documentation or some tutorial sites. And I've got in my announcements, websites for learning Python. So I had it delayed until February 8th. I'll go ahead and do that now, send that announcement out now so that you can, explore those if you want. These 2 links at the bottom here are the official, this is the official documentation for Python. It's done in kind of computerese, so it's a little bit harder to understand the documentation than this up here, the W3 Schools, which is really intended as a learning website to learn Python. It also does other languages besides Python and other things as well. But any of these are really good supplements to, kind of step by step. When you just want to look up how something works, both of these are really good. When you Google something, you can get, depending on Google's algorithm, you can get a lot of stuff that you might really have to dig through to find what you're looking for. If all you're looking for is how to use a function, or if a particular function exists, or how to use a method, then one of these is, maybe a little bit more direct method of getting there. But whatever works for you, I say,
Good to know.
find good websites and then bookmark them or whatever. Yeah, someone gonna say something? All right, so I just sent that announcement out. So you got those links in the announcement.
Good deal.
Okay, so if you haven't already, please do that little survey. It's anonymous, so I won't know if you're the one that said, "Wow, things are way too fast and I don't understand anything." If you want me to know, then you email me. if you want me to know that it's you. But if that's the case, say what is on your mind. I won't know who said what in the survey. But please do it so I can, make any adjustments before we get in, too much further along past this week. All right. Also, I'm pretty sure I sent an announcement about this, but I make sure I did. I've got office hours, Zoom office hours. Maybe I didn't. Did I? Maybe I didn't. So I will, maybe it was, I only did it for my other class. I'll send out an announcement about my Zoom office hours, which are going to be, they're 10:30 to 12, or 10:30 to whenever, on Mondays and Wednesdays. It's in the morning, not at night. So what I have is I've basically got Zoom in Windows Task Scheduler to start at 10:30. A couple of times I didn't get here till 10:30. I was on camera, but luckily nobody had joined it. But it'll just start, and I'll just be here working. And if somebody wants to go over something or has a question that you want to do orally rather than written, just hop onto the Zoom session during those office hours, and we can do that. Might be sometimes when some school meeting, has me unable to be here, and in that case, you'll join the meeting, and I'll never admit you into it. And that basically will tell you that I'm not here. But wait a few minutes at least, because if I'm getting coffee or something, I may not hear the ding ding that tells me that somebody's waiting to talk to me. And of course, you can also call me, on my office phone as well. But if you need help with something, doing it through Zoom and screen share, by screen sharing, and you can share your screen and stuff, it's a little bit better to get help that way. You can also, I think I'll do it in one announcement, hours when you can come into the classroom if you prefer that. I haven't gotten those established yet, but I'll get that done this week. And I'll put that in the same announcement. All right. Any last questions before we sign off?
Thanks for going over those examples.
Sure. No problem. Yeah, if it was, a seat class like it usually is, all this stuff, because we would meet 2 days a week, and there'd be a lot more time to go over examples. So anytime we have a Zoom meeting, if I don't go over something you need me to go over, just speak up, because you're probably not the only one. Okay. All right. If there's nothing else, then I'll see you next week.
I have a quick question. How do you make a program run again if you, what would you type to make it keep running?
Okay.
Over and over.
Like in Thorny? Oh, you mean to run over and over again?
Yeah, what do you put at the end to just make it go again without you having to hit F5?
Okay, so for something like this program where you were inputting any number. Oh wait, I need to show the screen again. Anyone that isn't interested in what we're about to do, you can sign off. If you are, then stay here, and I'll show you what Cody is asking. Okay, so for example, this program here in the 2.4.1.10 with input, so that you can just keep going over and over, input any number. Is that kind of what you're asking, Cody? So that you don't have to keep saying, you know, hit and run over and over? Is that what you're asking?
Sorry, my internet went weird right when you started talking.
So is this what, so if I wanted to run this program over and over without having to keep on saying F5 or hit the run button, is that what you're asking?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So one way to do it is actually better would be so in Python, whenever you have a what's called a program block, like a while loop, which we're going to learn about shortly. A while loop starts off a program block, and whenever you have a program block, you have to end the statement that begins the program block with a colon, and then all the stuff you want to be executed as part of that that block has to be indented, usually with a tab or spaces. But you have to choose one or the other, tabs or spaces. Don't intermix them, and they all have to be the same. So what this does now, this says while true. And so this is saying while whatever the condition in this parentheses is true. Well, true is always true. Okay. So basically this is saying do this forever. Never stop. And so do all these statements. When it comes to the end, it's going to go right back up to the beginning, because the while true says do it forever. I could also say while x greater than 0. Okay, so that would mean that if, or greater than equal. So I could say, well, x greater than equal to 0. Now that would give me an error because I'd have to initialize x to something before the while statement. But the point is that in this case, it would check to see if x is greater than or equal to 0, and if it is, it would execute everything that's underneath the while. If it's not, then it would end the while statement. So in this case, since x can be literally any number, including negative numbers, that wouldn't be a good test. I didn't. Okay, I guess that's it. Yeah, I guess this is the program. So now doing this, it's going to do this program forever. Okay. The only way to tell it to stop, well, one way to get it to stop is to put something in there that isn't going to be liked and it's going to error out on you. So that's one way. The other way to get it to stop is, whoops, no, it's not. I thought Control C would get it to stop, but when it's on an input statement is what's referred to as blocking. So, oh, I think it took the Control C as part of my input statement. So anyway, if I'm understood you, that's what you're looking for. Now,
Yeah, that's it.
Now, ideally, you want some more graceful way to get out of the program besides putting in a number that will cause an error. And we're actually going to be working towards that fairly quickly in one of the additional assignments I have you do. But basically, you would do something like set x to something to start off and say, well, x I can't see the keyboard. And then you'd have to do one more thing. You'd have to say X here. While priming the loop here. So, and then you would put this other input statement at the bottom. But of course, you'd have to test to make sure that X is not a, you know, that X is numeric, or else the floating point operation will blow up. But doing something like this as just a real quick, you know, top of my head kind of thing would be a little bit better than doing the while true. So if I do this, what do I do? Wait, is it not equal? Trying to remember the syntax for not equal now in Python. I know there's the syntax for C. Okay, it is the exclamation equal sign. All right. So now input a number. Now if I type exit, it exits. Okay, so doing it like this, you know, you're going on faith that the first thing that they enter is a numeric value. I would probably say, you know, do something, you know, if X not X dot is numeric. You know, you put some error checking and stuff in there. And so if it's not numeric, you tell them to go do it again or something like that. But we'll get into, you know, more complex stuff like that as we go along. This will work as long as the first input that they put in is numeric. It'll set it to float and that'll work. But then down here, if they don't put in a numeric value, well, actually, it actually will error out. As long as they put in exit, then it'll just exit. So yeah, again, I'd have to do some additional error checks to make this an actual good program, but I'm not really concerned about that right now. So this should do it, or the first one I showed you, just while true, and then you just do something to, you know, even closing out Thawny would get it to quit. But Control C will work sometimes with to end a Python program, but an input command is blocking, meaning it doesn't respond to commands like Control C. Only if it was in the middle of, you know, executing other code would Control C be useful. All right. That answers your question. Then anything else? All right. Good. All right. We'll see you next week.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.